Welcome to the show, guys. NFL Week 15 is here. Going to get you guys fully prepared no matter where you are in your playoffs or whether you're playing DFS. You're going to know who the optimal players to start are for this week. Now, a lot of people say, well, Joe, it's obvious. You're telling me to start Josh Allen. Well, yes, but you got to know if they got an optimal matchup. For example, Pat Mahomes this week does have a tough matchup versus Houston's secondary. They tend to play wide receivers and quarterbacks a little bit tougher. That being said, you can't sit Pat Mahomes. Again, that's just one example, right? So I'm going to go over each position and give you guys all the optimal starts at each position, and even give you guys some sits as well. Guys that have been really tough, you may want to avoid and probably just stay away from for this important fantasy football playoff week. Now, most of you guys have made it. Most of you guys have not. Either way, make sure you guys are subscribed to this channel, and especially for DFS. You want to get into some DFS and other stuff, and we're going to start rolling out into 2023 already. We are light years ahead of the competition. I've already got the rankings laid out in my mind, starting to lay out 16 rounds very early. So I'm a little aware, but where this all starts to take an effect is after the NFL draft. Then we know where everybody lands. Then 16 rounds is in full force, and you guys will be ready. So if you're new to the channel, make sure you guys do subscribe. Secondly, guys, there's a lot of games. There's the World Cup. There's a lot going on. Head over to Hooters.com or download the app and use code FFC20. That's the code you want to use at Hooters.com. It's FFC20 to save $10 on order of 30 or more on takeout or delivery. Check out their football bundles right now. Order in right now, guys. Amazing food. Treat yourself. Enhance that game watching experience. Football playoffs are here, and you want to keep that code handy, FFC20, to save on your order. Available at select locations across the USA. Grab that Hooters calendar right away when you check out after you guys get your food. Again, FFC20 is a code. Grab that Hooters calendar upon checkout as well. Okay, guys? Put it on the wall. Set your goals. Write everything you need on there to get your goals set and stay organized for this year, right? Hooters.com, FFC20. Order some food. All right, let's dive into this, guy. Starting off with the quarterback position. Again, you got to start the guys that have been consistent. But, for example, Mike White, great matchup this week, okay? Coming off an 11-point week, playing Detroit. Mike White, good matchup, okay? Arguably the easiest versus position. Should have a good game. Justin Herbert, Davis Mills, Josh Allen, all good matchups versus position. That being said, Davis Mills, easy matchup versus KC, but are you going to start him? Probably not. Maybe have a more safe, secure option than Davis Mills. I don't trust him, but on paper, he's got a good matchup. So the guys that got a good, Mike White, Justin Herbert, Davis Mills, Josh Allen, Mac Jones, Matt Ryan, Russell Wilson, Dak Prescott, Andy Dalton, okay? Now, understand, guys, there's no buys this week, so all the teams are playing. It's going to be intense. There's going to be some action going on, right, no matter what you're in. So these are the guys that have optimal matchups you may want to consider. The guys that have it a little bit tough, Pat Mahomes, Trevor Lawrence, you don't want to sit them. Trevor Lawrence coming off a hot week. He is playing Dallas. Dallas has been phenomenal, right? Be aware of that. If you have a better option, you may want to sit Trevor Lawrence coming off a hot week. May not duplicate the 36 points he had last week. Be aware of that. Geno Smith versus San Fran, Tua versus Buffalo, Tua, Geno Smith, Trevor Lawrence, Pat Mahomes, Justin Fields versus Philly, all stud quarterbacks with tough matchups. So if you are in the fantasy football playoffs, you got to start your starter, and I get it, but they do have it in tough this week. Be aware of that. Aaron Rodgers got in tough. Lamar Jackson, who's been, banged up. Maybe he's coming back. Check the injury report before, but he's playing Cleveland. Who's ever playing Cleveland, 10th hardest matchup versus position. Be aware of that. So take a look at other options, possibly if you've got these quarterbacks. But again, it's hard to sit. A guy like Trevor Lawrence coming off a hot week, Pat Mahomes, Geno Smith, but you got to be aware. Even Tom Brady versus Cincy, tougher matchup versus position. It's all about raising awareness for you guys. That's what it's all about, all right? So you guys can make educated decisions for this very important week 15. Can you believe it? This year has absolutely completely flown by, all right? Now, if you are playing DFS, like you say, well, I'm out of the playoffs, what do I do? Go to prizepicks.com. The code you want to use there, guys, is DFS Lion. When you use that code, you're going to double your first deposit up to $100. You parlay 2 to 5 prop picks, right? More or less. Like, is Derrick Henry going to rush more or less his projected rushing yards that's on Prize Picks, right? You put 2 to 5 of those together, and it's easier to win, guys, all right? More or less. You select, is this quarterback going to throw more or less than the projected passing yards? And you put 2 to 5 of those together. It's that easy, guys. I play it. Enhances my game watching experience. PrizePicks.com, DFS line. Go try it out right now, guys. The code you want to use is DFS line. Try it out. It's going to make it a lot more fun watching these games, especially with playoffs coming up. Go, and I've linked it here below on YouTube, all right? Starting with the running backs here. Let's keep going here. Guys that have good matchups. Jerick McKinnon coming off a great week. Him and Pacheco were both involved last week. Great matchup. And again, that could continue, but it may be a committee. Be aware of that. Christian McCaffrey coming off a hot week. Great matchup. J.K. Dobbins coming off a hot week. Great matchup. Is he going to stay healthy to finish out the season? Very possible. A lot of people asking, do I start J.K.? Sure. And he's available on some waiver wires. Hopefully you picked him up. Good matchup. Miles Sanders, good matchup coming off a hot week. All these guys coming off hot weeks have actually got good matchups going in this week, which is really good. Derrick Henry, safe week, solid week last week, fumbled a time or two. Either way, he still had 26 points, getting it done on the ground, getting it done near the red zone there with touchdowns. Derrick Henry, 26 points last week. Easy matchup this week versus the Chargers. Brian Robinson, definitely want to consider starting him. Dalvin Cook, been mediocre at best the past 3 weeks. 10, 16, 10 points consecutively. Dalvin Cook does, although, have an easy matchup this week. Okay, something to be aware. Alexander Madison, again, similar to Dalvin Cook. You may want to consider starting these guys. Good matchup, okay? Najee Harris, been boring at best. Mediocre matchup versus Carolina, kind of mid-range. Definitely want to consider him. He's been, again, boring at best. Zeke Elliott, Tony Pollard, mid-range matchup. Definitely want to consider them. And Jonathan Taylor, who has been a big-time bust this week, got a mid-range matchup, been safe at best. 13 points last outing. Should, again, produce another 10 to 15 points. Does have a mediocre matchup. Guys that have it in tough. Kenneth Walker should be back, but he's against San Fran. Should be a good test and challenge. Now, if he does beat the test and does well versus San Fran, definitely want to consider picking up next year as a top running back. We're going to see how he performs when faced with adversity, which is coming off this fake injury. Now, people saw this. He ran off the sideline, kind of tweaked his ankle. It looked really, really soft. Either way, he was hurt. It is what it is. Coming back, hopefully, check the status. If he does come back and play San Fran, it's going to be interesting to see how he does against a tough rush defense. So, going to be a good test for him. Josh Jacobs, been hot. Tough matchup versus New England. Again, do you sit Josh Jacobs? Do you sit these guys like Walker? No. You start them, but I'm just making you aware that they have tough matchups. I still start Walker. I still start Jacobs if Walker plays, right? Jacobs, again, was a little banged up. Should play either way. Austin Eckler, do you sit him? Absolutely not, but he's got a tough versus Tennessee's rush defense. Still got to play him. Nick Chubb got it in tough versus position, coming off 2 mediocre 8-point games. Been crappy, but again, if you got him, you got to start him. Travis Etienne, tough matchup versus Dallas. I mean, I'm taking a look at this, man. They are at home. They are a 4-point underdog versus Dallas. Dallas got a good defense. Travis Etienne coming off a cold week, I should say. Ice cold week, I should say. I'm getting my reds and hots all confused. Cold week. When I see red here, means it's a tough matchup. It's a warning, right? Tough matchup. 5th hardest versus position 4, Etienne versus Dallas. I don't trust ATN. It's up to you guys if you want him. Saquon Barkley, who was a little limited last week, coming off that injury. Tough matchup versus Washington, divisional matchup. Although he said he's 100% ready to go. Got to make a statement here if he wants to get paid and incentivized. Joe Mixon, tough matchup. 7th hardest versus position versus Tampa Bay. Be aware of that. Coming off a 13-point last week. Should be good to go. It's hard to sit Mixon, right? You can't sit him. DeAndre Swift been sucky. Him and Williams, they do have it in tough versus the Jets. Be aware of that. Dylan and Aaron Jones, tougher matchup versus position. Just raising awareness here. Leonard Fournette, Rachaad White, tougher matchup versus Cincy, and Patterson Algier, tougher matchup versus the Saints, all right? People ask about, David Montgomery, check his injury stats. It should be good, though. Tough matchup versus Philly. I'd say more of a mid-range matchup, all right? So those are your starts and sits, guys. Again, Kenneth Walker, like I said, Austin Eckler, Nick Chubb, Travis Etienne, tougher matchups. But again, you got to make a decision. Do you want to start and sit? Drop your questions below. I'll try to get to as many as I can because every scenario is different on your rosters. Optimal must-starts at the wide receiver position. Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, great matchup versus Tennessee. Those guys give up a lot of points. Michael Pittman, I mean, he's been mediocre at best. Him, Campbell, Pierce, they do have a good matchup versus Minnesota. Be aware. Garrett Wilson coming off a decent week, finally getting into the groove a little bit. Actually, the past 3 weeks he's been solid. I don't want to say that he's been, getting into the groove, but this year, the past 3 weeks have been hot for Garrett Wilson. I would say he's a definite start versus Detroit this week. Brandon Cooks, Eagle calls, they've been banged up. Check the injury status. No matter who starts there at the wide receiver position, they're playing KC. They've got a good matchup. It's been a disaster. Chris Moore may be a viable option coming off a 25-point week last week. predicated if Brandon Cooks and Nico calls it out. They've been absolutely useless this year completely. DJ Moore coming off a 1-point crappy week, screwed a lot of fantasy teams, does have it in good versus Pittsburgh this week. Michael Gallup, CeeDee Lamb, great matchup this week versus Jacksonville. So other options there for you guys. Amari Cooper coming off a crappy week last week, good matchup versus Baltimore. And Tyler Lockett and Metcalf, great matchup versus San Fran secondary, pretty decent. If you want to start Pickens, good matchup versus Carolina as well. Christian Watson returns. He's got relatively easy matchup as well versus the Rams. Him and Lazard, but I do like Watson, who has been hot the past 3 weeks. Those are your must starts at the wide receiver position. Be aware, Hopkins got it in tough. Adam Thielen, Jefferson versus Indy, pretty tough, but coming off a hot week, you don't sit Justin Jefferson under no circumstances. Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's been pretty hot lately against the Jets secondary, pretty tough. Again, you do not sit Amon-Ra St. Brown, okay? Again, this is just being aware. Now, other people that have it in tough, just be aware. Chris Godwin versus Cincy, got it in tough. And, I think you're good. Chicago's wide receivers, I mean, they're a big question mark versus Philly. Be careful there. I'll give you a couple tight ends to start here. Travis Kelce, you don't sit him. George Kittle's been ice cold. Easy matchup versus Seattle, though. Could be a bounce back week. Dalton Schultz, Gerald Everett, Greg Dulcich, all good matchups versus position. Henry, Conklin, all safe tight ends. Now, Mark Andrews does have a tough matchup versus Cleveland. Again, coming off 2 cold weeks and a tough matchup, hard to start Mark Andrews. But if you don't have a better tight end option, you invested so much in Mark Andrews this year, you can't sit him. Although he's been ice cold. Again, the quarterback play been a big part of that with, Lamar being hurt, banged up, new quarterback coming in. It was rough, right? Last week, particularly, especially when you're in their playoffs. Hawkinson, mid-range matchup, easy. I mean, I'd start him. Dawson Knox, I would start him. Easy matchup versus Miami. Foster, Moreau, again, very hard to trust anybody from Las Vegas. They've been, ice, hot and cold, especially Moreau. Again, if you're desperate, you definitely want to start him. Hayden Hurst been ice cold, easy matchup versus Tampa Bay, and he's been banged up, so be careful there. So again, with tight ends, get your 10 points and be happy. Let's talk about defense streamers here. The defenses that I like this week: Vikings versus Indy, KC versus Houston. Houston's been terrible. Green Bay versus the Rams. Obviously, Rams quarterback situation has been a mess. They lost Cooper Kupp. They lost their quarterback. Absolute disaster there. So Green Bay could be appealing at home. So that's appealing to me. Eagles, obviously must start here. Cardinals again versus Denver. They've been suspect to say the least. Check out Russell Wilson's status again before the game. He was a little concussed last week. Falcons versus Saints, Steelers, Broncos, Panthers, and Giants versus Washington. All decent matchups if you need to stream, okay? So this is it, guys. A lot of questions need to be answered. Drop them below. Join the Patreon. Go patreon.com/FFCounselor. I'll get to them. So this is starts and sits for NFL. Can you believe it or not? Week 15. Drop your questions below. I'll try to get to as many as I humanly possibly can. I appreciate you. Subscribe. We're going to start rolling out 2023 content. I've already got a couple of videos on it already. We're going to be rolling that out for you guys, all right? Week 15, guys. Enjoy the games and order some Hooters. FFC20 is the code. We'll talk soon. I'm out.